Guthrie, good morning. Welcome back to Australia.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
Arlo, you'll be 66 years old this year. What is it with old folkies? They never retire. Is it just that there's still too many good causes to sing about?
No, it's not that. I think it has to do with you look at the guys who are doing it. Pete Seeger is 94 or 5 this year, and he's still playing. And he came to me, 10 years. I mean, I worked with Pete over 40 years, and so 4 times longer than my father ever worked with him. And he comes to me after that and he says, Arlo, I can't do those big shows anymore. I can't play like I used to play. I can't sing like I used to sing. I said, Pete, look at our audience. They can't hear like they used to hear. It shouldn't be a problem. And, once you get over that, he said, well, maybe you're right. And so we did Carnegie Hall last November together with my entire family, and it was just lovely.
What's it like? I mean, Pete Seeger, you grew up with Pete Seeger. You've been working with him for 40 years, but he was around when you were just a little boy. You grew up with all these guys. What does that do to the connection you have with someone who you're on stage with all these years later, Carnegie Hall at the age of 90 plus?
Well, it's really not so much the songs that we know them for, these guys, or any of the other wonderful things that they've stood up for, all of the demonstrations that I remember, playing along with him, marching down the streets in Washington, D.C., or for this, that, or the other thing. It's really the spirit of the guy. And when he walked out on stage at Carnegie Hall with me and my family, the audience stood up and they would not sit down and they just kept cheering. And, we're getting ready to play and we couldn't overtake the sound of the crowd. And I realized, they love the guy. It's as simple as that. He has stood up for them for so long, for their hopes and dreams and whatever they were, thinking about. And he represents them in some way and still does. And it's the spirit which is ageless. And he just stood there, trying to be as humble as he could. But what are you going to do? And finally, they settled in and we got the show underway. And it was lovely. And it was their chance to thank him for all the years that he'd been being him.
And do you think there was more to it than that, too? Thanking Pete Seeger, as you say, for all those years and all those words and representing them to the world. But on stage with you, Arlo Guthrie, who a whole nother generation learnt protest songs and conscience songs through, and then your children. So it's this sense of this being handed on, that they're not going to be left without this kind of voice.
There will always be those voices, who stand up for the good stuff. And we all know what the good stuff is at this point. You don't have to, go over it and over it. A sense of fairness, a sense of justice, a sense of, hope and things like that. And I love the idea of people being able to do those things and at the same time even make a living, which is fairly rare. It's tough enough just in the world making a living, let alone standing up for stuff. But it seems that I've done fairly well, and the kids are doing great,
and
even the grandkids.
The kids in that kind of tradition of standing up for people, of singing about.
I think it's really just justifying, the lives that people have. That was the great gift that my father, I think, left us all. Wasn't so much about what the subject was or what to protest this week. These guys weren't professional protesters. They weren't looking for stuff that was wrong. It was the validation of who you are as a human being, that everybody counts, that everybody's got a name, that there's no throwaway people in this world. And that makes you feel pretty good at times, especially when the world seems to get so small that we recognize that there are billions of us at this point, and you begin to feel like maybe there's nothing you can do. So when somebody tells you, no, you are important, it's unique. A person moves one grain of sand, and you change the whole beach. That's a reality. That's not a theory. It's not a political, discussion. It's just the way it is. And once you know that, and you feel it, and you sing about it, and you give people the feeling like, yeah, I can move a grain of sand. It ain't that hard.
You're listening to RM Breakfast. Our guest this morning is Arlo Guthrie. Arlo Guthrie, family is very important to you. Sure, we think, and for your whole life, you've been Arlo Guthrie, and the next thought is Woody Guthrie. Now you tour the world with your family, your kids, their kids, singing on stage. It's a real family affair. The Guthrie musical legacy tours. Um, Tell us what's special about that, because for some people it's very special just the thought of your kids wanting to travel with you, wanting to be by your side.
I remember Pete telling me a story one time that played out in real life for us. And it was sort of like this. You know, I remember when I started working with my kids on stage and the grandkids, uh, you realize at some point that as a normal kid parent relationship, you don't actually have to listen to what they're saying. You sort of have a sense of what it is. It goes in one ear and out the other. Well, the same thing's true with them. They've heard their parents' voice over and over. Don't do this, don't do that, whatever, wear this, wear that. And it just goes in and out. But on stage, you can't do that. As a musician, you actually have to listen to what the other people are doing, or the music's going to be awful. And so you suddenly start to listen. The fact that it's your kid or grandkid or your dad or your granddad doesn't really make any difference. You have to pay attention. That discipline doesn't just stay on stage. You learn it on stage, but it stays with you when you get off the stage.
So it extends your relationship with your children, do you
Of
think?
course it does. Which is why Pete used to say if he could get all these politicians to sing a few songs together, things would be a lot better. Because they don't listen to each other. They don't even they don't have the discipline to do it. They don't know how. It's not that they don't want to. They have no practical reality of it. So as a musician, as an entertainer, you have to have that. That's one of the rules of the game. Otherwise, you just suck as an artist.
And if you're having a moment with one of your kids, and let's face it, most parents have moments with their kids and the other way around, do they sort of sit out a few songs?
No, I mean it's not something you would sort of employ as a technique. It's just something that you learn, and it stays with you. You know, you learn how to walk, but every time you walk, you don't think about it. If you did, you'd fall down. It's just part of your everyday practical experience, part of the toolkit that you have to be a human being, and I love that.
Talk about listening to your parents. Your sister Nora said of your father he was, quote, a proud lush, a comfortable luster. He believed in flying saucers, dreamed of getting Ingrid Bergman pregnant. Quite a dream. What was it about your father, about Woody, that you felt you could embrace, you wanted to embrace, and what you knew you wanted to leave behind?
I think the most interesting thing, just as being his kid, about him was he really made no apologies for being himself. Most of us do. He would, walk down from the apartment to the street to buy a pack of cigarettes or something like that, and show up on the other coast, a month later, not telling anybody, not mentioning he had left, and he made no apologies for it.
To you guys, to the
to
family?
anybody. Now that's tough on a spouse. It's tough on a kid.
Really tough.
Well, it can be. And so he had a number of spouses and a number of kids. And, but that to me is that ability to not look back, to just be yourself, has become really one of the foundations of my life. It's hard to do. It's not easy to do, to break the conventions that most of us employ to get along with each other. That's a stiffer price to pay for things than we normally would think about. He didn't want to pay it, and he refused. I remember one time he came in, he was sleeping on the floor, and I said, Daddy, why are you sleeping on the floor for? He said, if I was to sleep on a bed, I'd get soft. And if I get soft, I can't leave when I want. And I can't sleep where I find myself.
It's a hard balance, though, isn't it? I mean, you were there.
I admire it.
You admire it, but you haven't. Well, maybe you have. Looking on, I would suggest maybe you didn't emulate it entirely because you were married to your wife, Jackie, for 43 years. You didn't walk down the
just because
shop.
I admire it doesn't mean I have to imitate it. This is the big mistake that people have always made with my dad. They come in, they're wearing the same kind of hat, they're wearing the same kind of shoes, they're playing the same kind of guitar with the same sign on it, and they emulate him, but they don't actually imitate what he was, which is to be yourself. They're trying to be him. He's telling them, be yourself. And so I have learned to be myself, to be comfortable with being me. I'm not him. I do my things, and I have my relationships with, with my kids. I had a wonderful relationship with my wife, and she passed away. I just saw past tense, but that was the life I chose, and I was happy with the decisions I've made. I think that was his biggest lesson to everybody, that it's better to fail at being yourself than to succeed at being somebody else.
Your wife, Jackie, as you've just told us, she died last year, not long ago, in
Yeah.
October, of liver cancer. It was quite a quick process, I think, in the end. At the time, you wrote, and I'm quoting here, we didn't always like each other. From time to time, there were moments when we'd have our bags packed by the door, but there was this great love that we shared from the moment we met. How are you dealing with life without that great love?
It's tough. And it's the little things that are tough. It's not the big things that people talk about. It's, after an interview like this, we're chatting. I would call her on the phone and say, it went pretty well. That's a little thing. It's not, the world doesn't care about that.
But it's a constant.
But it was a part of my life. And so, how do you live with a hole in your heart, a hole in your life? It's just not there. You have to take some time getting used to. So it's interesting to me just from a personal point of view. The thing that amazed me was that I found hundreds and maybe even thousands of people wrote in going through the same thing. And you don't think about that all the time. You don't think that the person across from you maybe going through something like that, got a hole in their heart. It makes you a little more compassionate, a little more slow to judge, those kind of things. And that to me is a gift.
And I just imagined, not knowing you at all, but knowing what you do, that pain, that hole in your heart, as you describe it, would or inevitably find its way into your music. Is that inevitable? Has it happened
I don't
yet?
know. Not really for me yet. This is still fairly new. So, I felt like a wounded dog. You just want to sort of go off in the woods by yourself and not, and so I'm just coming out of that. I don't know what to make of it.
Do you get a sense back from the audience? Have you noticed that the audience that comes to you because they know you know your work, perhaps know this story? Have you got any of that sense back?
Well, the big thing that I did get was all the cards and letters and the internet notes and all the stuff, and it really came from everywhere around the world. I mean, people I didn't actually know, some that I did, and I just felt, geez, there's enough suffering in the world just as it is, just as on a fabulously wonderful day. There's enough suffering in the natural world without adding to it. And we see so many people adding to it. They want more money, they want more fame, they want more fortune, they want more of this, that. They're selling you something, going to buy something, whatever it is. And it just makes me a little more, uh, I don't know, a little more looking at the world in a way that I didn't before. I see that I have my own responsibility, and that is to not add to the misery that's already here sort of naturally. So I don't sell anybody anything. I'm not trying to pitch them anything. I'm just trying to, do my work, sing my songs, have people feel good about who they are and what they're thinking about, those kind of things. If I can do that and get by, I'll be all right.
American folk legend Arlo Guthrie is our guest in the Breakfast Studio today. Let's talk about what you're singing about now, the stories you're talking about now, because once everyone knew you as pro-drugs, anti-Nixon, anti-nuke. You've since become a registered Republican voter. You supported Ron Paul. It's in some ways, it's not an unusual path, that growth from one side to the other side in life. But to the left-swinging folk musical community, it might have been a bit of a shock, I would have thought.
I don't like the idea that people judge each other by the names of the organizations they belong to, by what church they go to, by what street they live on, by what college or university they attended. I've always been against that kind of sort of group judgment. And so it was very easy for me to become, registered this or registered that. I haven't changed. I still think the same things I thought. I'm still, a union guy. I think that's important, at least back home in the States. I don't know what the stories are here, but I like the idea that people have a voice together that they wouldn't have just as individuals. The United States is a union. You can't be anti-union and pro-United States at the same time. So you see these jerks talking about this stuff on TV all the time. It just drives me nuts. I understand that there are things that are worth talking about that are political. But I was never a political person. I felt like a farmer who was growing stuff out in the backyard, and a couple of suits show up one day and say, "You can't grow that in your field." And so you start bitching and moaning about it, you start yelling, and they call you a protester. I'm not a protester, I'm just a farmer. I wanted the freedoms that you think you have are slowly being eroded everywhere around the world in order to accommodate the culture. I mean, even getting my instruments in here, like they were some kind of threat to Australian security. They're being held at customs. Why? Just because somebody's job is to look out for stuff? It drives me nuts, this kind of stuff. We should be looking at ways to make life easier, not harder on each other. And so I speak up for those kinds of things. I'm not afraid to do that. I've always done it. My kids do it. My grandkids do it. More power to them.
And do you think in the American politic today, are people speaking up as much, or only certain ends of the spectrum being heard? It seems to be quite a divided debate in America, and I wonder if there's a lot of people in the middle who just feel like, you know, they've got the Tea Party there, they've got the ultra left there, they're not being heard.
I don't think they hear each other, let alone hear themselves. I think it's kind of stupid most of the time. They're cross-talking. They're not talking about the same thing. They have code words that they use. You know, we're talking about guns back home in the States right now. It's a different thing to live in the country out in the middle of nowhere, or live in some kind of big urban city or something like that. People are talking like you need the same rule to apply to everyone across the board, no matter what. That doesn't work. That's why people like smaller and smaller government. And people who live out in the hills or something like that feel as though there are city people coming in telling them how to live. And there are people in the cities thinking, oh, there's a bunch of country hicks, talking about liberties that we should have or could have or something like that. They're not talking about the same thing. It's not practical. They're talking ideology, which has no basis in everyday reality. And so what I try to talk about from time to time, the things that I write and the things that I do on stage, is to get real. Let's talk to let's actually have a conversation and not cross-talk about standing up for what we think is right.
Does it surprise you that many of the things your father, Woody Guthrie, railed against, you could still be writing songs about today? In fact, still are.
He doesn't even have to write new songs. It's the old songs.
We've got the old songs.
That could have been wrote yesterday.
But look, the lyrics of one of your songs, "In times like these, I see the storm clouds rise above me when leaders profit from deep divisions."
Yeah.
Because I think this is interesting.
I wrote it after Katrina. Okay. And I saw that, there were not just storm clouds that were in real life in the air, but we're going through a storm, a political storm as well. And there are people who profit from it. Those people drive me freaking nuts. I don't care if they're Republicans, Democrats, they're this, that, right, left, center. I don't care what their story is. What I care about is that there are people who see opportunities to profit at the expense of others. I think it's wrong. I don't care what parties they belong to or what church they go to or what kind of education they got or what their story is. I don't care if they're black, white, or purple. What bothers me is when people use each other to advance in their own minds. And all they actually do, they don't actually advance anyway. What they actually do is keep themselves chained in this long history of people who don't learn. Kindness is a big thing for me. It's more important than profit. It's like Woodstock, Everybody talks about who was at Woodstock, who was there, what, blah, blah, blah. The big thing at Woodstock was that they opened the gates for free because of the health and safety and concerns for the people who were there. It would be like an insurance company today saying for the health and safety of our subscribers or whatever, we're just going to have free insurance for a year. You couldn't imagine it. It would never happen. It happened at Woodstock, and that's why we're still talking about it from time to time. Those kinds of right decisions in the midst of catastrophe, chaos, whatever, Those are the guys who I like, the guys who are willing to make those kind of decisions.
Arlo Guthrie, it's a disappointment for us that your guitars got locked up in customs. We'd have loved to hear you sing, but what's clear is you're still in fine voice. Thank you so much for joining us on Breakfast.
Thank you.
RN, your world unfolding.